After 40 years working as an executive assistant at a utilities company in Knoxville, Tennessee, Margaret Maggie Whitmore finally retired. She'd always been the responsible one, the woman who never took sick days, never missed a deadline, never asked for more than she needed. Her colleagues threw her a modest farewell lunch with carrot cake and warm handshakes, and when she left the office for the final time, she felt a strange sense of weightlessness. She walked home slowly that afternoon, letting the spring breeze settle around her like a soft shawl. For the first time in decades, there were no emails to answer, no alarm clocks to dread, just peace. Maggie smiled to herself as she unlocked the front door to the quiet, two-story home she'd shared with her husband, Franklin, for more than 40 years. Inside, the house was still. A vase of lilies sat on the hallway table, their petals just beginning to curl. She placed her retirement plaque beside them, walked into the kitchen, and opened her purse. Her fingers trembled slightly as she reached for her bank card. It was time. Time to finally take a look at the savings she and Franklin had built together. She slid into the chair by the kitchen window and opened her laptop. The bank's login page loaded slowly. She entered her credentials, clicked View Balance, and froze. $155,038.46. She blinked, refreshed the page, waited. Same number. Her heart thudded. That couldn't be right. They had saved for years. She earned a decent salary, $88,000 annually, and Franklin received a government pension. They'd lived modestly, rarely traveled, barely ate out. She'd skipped new coats in the winter, cooked casseroles for days, reused plastic bags until they fell apart. All for this, for their retirement. And now there was barely enough to last a few years? Panic bloomed in her chest. Maybe it was a glitch, a bank error, something that could be explained quickly. Still clutching her bag, she drove straight to the bank. The teller, a young woman named Katie with kind eyes, pulled up her account and printed a full transaction history for the past 5 years. Maggie stood at the counter, her mouth dry, as page after page rolled out of the printer. Katie handed them to her gently. "Take your time, ma'am," she said. Maggie sat down in the corner chair by the window, her hands already rifling through the statements. And there it was, line after line. Every month, without exception, $3,000 transferred out of her checking account. Like clockwork, same amount, same day, same destination. For 5 years. Her breath caught. That alone was $180,000. Her stomach turned. If it had started earlier, how far back did it go? The papers trembled in her hands. Her thoughts spiraled. She had trusted Franklin with the finances from day one. It was his domain, his thing. He'd always kept meticulous ledgers by hand, little notebooks with perfect penmanship, every penny tracked. She'd always found it charming, trustworthy. Now that trust cracked like glass beneath her feet, she left the bank in a daze, the spring air suddenly colder, harsher. At home, she walked straight into Franklin's study. The old leather-bound ledger was still there, tucked neatly on the shelf, just as it always had been. She opened it, and within seconds, the ground shifted beneath her. There they were, handwritten entries going back decades, neat and deliberate. At first, just a few $100s, then more. Slowly, steadily increasing, and beside one transaction line dated just 6 months ago, a small note in Franklin's familiar handwriting. Living allowance, Char and the kids. Her hands went numb. Character, Charlene Dawson. Maggie hadn't heard that name in years. She used to live 2 blocks over. She was the kind of woman people whispered about, charismatic, bold, always surrounded by attention. Once upon a time, Franklin had been smitten with her before Maggie even came into the picture. Everyone knew, but she thought it had been nothing more than a forgotten high school crush. Now, staring at the words written in black ink, Maggie realized the truth. He'd never let her go. For 30 years, Franklin had been secretly sending Maggie's money to another woman, to support her, to raise her children, while telling Maggie to live frugally, to save, to prepare. And she had. She'd scrimped and sacrificed and swallowed her questions, all to build a future that wasn't even hers to begin with. In that moment, Maggie felt her entire life collapse inward, like a house with its foundation ripped out. And she wasn't sure which stung more, the betrayal itself or the fact that she hadn't seen it coming. Maggie sat in Franklin's study long after the sun had gone down, the only light coming from a small desk lamp with a fraying shade. The ledger lay open in front of her, pages filled with the ink of betrayal. Every month, every dollar, every lie. She didn't cry, not at first. It was like her heart had been hollowed out, no room for tears, only disbelief. How could the man she had slept beside for over 4 decades look her in the eye every morning and tell her they were planning for the future, all while funneling money to another woman? And not just any woman, Charlene Char Dawson. The same Char who used to saunter down the block in her sundresses like she owned the neighborhood. The same Char who had gotten pregnant in her 20s, never named the father, and quietly disappeared for a while. The neighborhood assumed she'd moved out of state. Apparently, she hadn't moved far. Still stunned, Maggie flipped deeper into the ledger. The entries went back further than she'd imagined. 30 years. Every single withdrawal was documented with care, and beside most of them, little notes. School fees, Tyler, medical expenses, Char, groceries for the kids, emergency rent. Her hands shook. Tyler. So that was the boy's name. She had never heard it mentioned, not once. And yet, here was Franklin's pen, spelling it out again and again. What stung more than the money was what it represented. Choice. He had chosen to support another household, another woman, another child, chosen them over her, and he had done it silently, with no guilt, no confession, no conversation. She snapped the ledger shut and sat back. That night, she didn't sleep. Her mind reeled, questions pounding like drums. What else had he hidden? Who else knew? By sunrise, Maggie had made up her mind. She wasn't going to live in confusion. She needed clarity. She needed the truth. That morning, she waited for Franklin to leave for his morning walk. He always took the same route, right after coffee. As soon as the door shut behind him, she walked down the hallway, past the photographs on the wall, toward her son Eric's old bedroom. He'd moved out years ago, had a family of his own now, living across town with his wife Rachel and their son Caleb, Maggie's only grandchild. But that morning, Eric wasn't across town. He was sitting in the living room when she opened the door, sipping coffee from one of the mugs Maggie had given him as a Christmas gift years ago. She blinked. "What are you doing here?" He looked up, startled. "Dad called me, said you were acting strange, said you found his ledger." Maggie's heart dropped. "So you know?" Eric set the mug down slowly, like it was suddenly fragile. "Mom, listen, don't overreact." Her blood went cold. That tone, condescending, measured, the same one Franklin used when he was trying to calm her down like a child who didn't understand the world. "You knew," she whispered. "You've known." Eric stood. "Not everything. I mean, Dad mentioned helping someone years ago, said it was a friend going through tough times. I didn't ask questions. I figured it was charity." "Charity?" Maggie's voice cracked, the first sign of her composure slipping. "He took my money. For 30 years. Gave it to his old flame. Raised her son. While telling me to buy canned vegetables on sale and reuse sandwich bags." Eric held up his hands. "Okay, I get it. It sounds bad. But look, Char's had a rough life. Tyler's been in and out of the hospital for years with a heart issue. Dad's just doing what he thought was right." "What about what was right for me?" Maggie shouted. The room fell into silence. "I was working late, managing the bills, packing your lunches, putting you through college while he played savior behind my back. And you just went along with it?" Eric looked away. "It's not that simple, Mom." "No, Eric," Maggie said, her voice trembling. "It's exactly that simple." He exhaled, his jaw tightening. "Look, it's not like Char was living in luxury. She's had it rough. Dad just helped out. You're making it sound like an affair." Maggie laughed, a dry, hollow sound. He called it a living allowance. What would you call that? Eric didn't answer. And just like that, something inside Maggie snapped, not with rage, but with clarity. She saw it clearly now. They had built a life without her, a family within the family, a quiet shift in loyalty that happened while she was too busy being dependable. She was the reliable one, the cook, the cleaner, the woman behind the curtain. And when it came time to honor that loyalty, they handed it to someone else. Maggie stepped forward and looked her son in the eye. You chose your father's secrets over your mother's truth. You made that choice. Don't pretend you didn't. Eric swallowed hard but said nothing. I gave you everything, she said quietly, and you gave me silence in return. She walked out without another word, her spine straight despite the weight of betrayal pressing on her shoulders. That afternoon, she called a lawyer. The lawyer's office smelled faintly of lemon polish and old books. Maggie Whitmore sat across from a woman in a crisp navy blazer named Lauren Ames, a seasoned attorney in downtown Knoxville who specialized in high-asset divorce cases. Maggie had found her through a former co-worker, someone who had described Lauren as brilliant and bloodless, exactly what you want when the gloves come off. I want everything documented, Maggie said, sliding a leather tote bag across the desk. This is 30 years' worth of financial betrayal. Lauren opened the tote and lifted out the ledgers, folders, and a thick manila envelope filled with printed bank statements. Her eyebrows lifted slightly as she flipped through a few pages. This is meticulous, she murmured. My husband kept records like it was scripture, Maggie said bitterly. Turns out it works in my favor. Lauren smiled faintly. It usually does when the other party writes their own confession by hand. The meeting lasted 2 hours. By the end of it, Maggie had signed paperwork authorizing Lauren to file for divorce and begin the legal process of asset division. She left the office feeling shaky, but clear. She wasn't doing this out of vengeance. This wasn't rage. It was recognition that she had played by the rules her whole life, and it had nearly erased her. She wasn't going to let it erase what was left. That night, she returned home to find Franklin in the kitchen, casually peeling an orange like nothing had happened. The ledger was missing from the study. He'd noticed. Good. He didn't even look up when he spoke. I heard you talk to Eric. You blew this whole thing out of proportion. Maggie said nothing as she removed her coat, hung it by the door, and walked into the living room. The silence between them crackled. Finally, he turned toward her. You went through my things, my private records. What gives you the right? That did it. Maggie stepped closer, her voice low but unwavering. 30 years of lies. You stole from me, lied to me, built a second life using the money I earned, and now you want to talk about privacy? Franklin's expression twisted. It wasn't like that. You don't understand. Char needed help. Tyler. I don't care, Maggie snapped, her voice rising. I begged you for help when Eric broke his leg in 5th grade. Remember that? I had to borrow money from coworkers while you were squirreling away thousands every month for your precious Char. Franklin stepped back, startled. You let me struggle, she continued, eyes burning. You watched me cut coupons, skip vacations, say no to new clothes, all so you could play savior to a woman who couldn't even look me in the eye. He opened his mouth, but she cut him off. Don't you dare stand there and act like this is some noble sacrifice. It was a choice, and you made it over and over again. I was never your partner, just a bank account with a house key. The words hung in the air like smoke. Franklin's face paled. He reached for her arm, voice faltering. Maggie, we've been married over 40 years. That has to count for something. She pulled away. It counts as proof I've been patient longer than I should have. His voice sharpened. You're not thinking clearly. Divorce at your age? What are you going to do? Start over in your 60s? Maggie's laugh was soft, but there was no humor in it. You think this is the worst thing that's ever happened to me? Try raising a son alone while your husband lies for 3 decades. Starting over sounds like mercy. He shook his head in disbelief. You're bitter. No, she said firmly. I'm awake. And with that, She turned and walked upstairs. The next morning, Maggie didn't make coffee for two. She didn't fold Franklin's laundry. She didn't leave the bathroom light on like she always had, knowing he'd wake up first. Instead, she opened every window in the house, letting the Tennessee breeze sweep through and carry away the weight of every silent sacrifice she'd made. Then she made two calls, one to a locksmith and one to her financial advisor. When Franklin came home from the store that afternoon, he found his key no longer worked. His voice boomed from the porch. "Maggie, are you kidding me?" She opened the door calmly and handed him a manila envelope. Inside were the divorce papers, a copy of the asset summary, and a note that simply read, "You can return what you took, or I'll see you in court." He stared at the papers like they were written in a language he didn't understand. "You're being cruel," he hissed. "No," Maggie said softly. "I'm just finally telling the truth." And then she shut the door. It clicked behind her like punctuation, the end of one life, the beginning of another. Franklin didn't sign the divorce papers right away. For 2 weeks, he sulked in silence, refusing to move out, wandering around the house like a ghost that no longer belonged there. He ordered takeout every night, burgers, fried chicken, even steak, meals he had once scolded Maggie for being unnecessary luxuries. She cooked only for herself now, vibrant meals full of color and spice, plated neatly on floral china she hadn't used in years. The house was quiet, but not empty. It pulsed with something new, ownership. Then, just as Maggie was beginning to reclaim the rhythm of her own space, Franklin struck back in the most pathetic way imaginable. He brought Charlene Dawson, into their home. One Tuesday evening, Maggie walked into the kitchen to find Char sitting at her dining table, sipping tea like she had been invited. "Maggie," Char said, smiling sweetly, "so good to finally talk, woman to woman." Maggie's grip tightened on the doorframe. "You're in my house." "She's here because I asked her to be," Franklin said, stepping in from the hallway, arms crossed like a teenager trying to look defiant. "We need to clear the air. We're all adults here." Char tilted her head, playing innocent. "I never meant to cause any trouble between you and Franklin. I just needed help. You know how life goes." "No," Maggie said flatly. "I don't." Eric walked in next, holding Caleb by the hand. Maggie's stomach dropped. They brought her grandson into this farce. "Grandma Char smells like flowers," Caleb squealed, running into Char's lap. Maggie's chest tightened. Franklin was watching her closely, searching her face for a crack, a weakness, a soft spot he could exploit. But Maggie was done cracking. She looked Char dead in the eyes. "So this is your move. Step into my home, smile sweetly, play the victim. Let my husband fight your battles." Char blinked, then offered a theatrical sigh. "I raised a son alone, Maggie, while you had a husband beside you. I made sacrifices." "You made choices," Maggie snapped. "Don't confuse the two." Eric stepped forward. "Mom, please, we just want peace." She turned to him slowly. "Peace? After hiding this for years? After siding with the woman who drained my life's savings and called it help?" He opened his mouth but had no answer. The room went still. Maggie took a slow breath and said, with razor-sharp calm, "Franklin, you and Char have 1 week. Get out of my house, or the sheriff will escort you." Char looked startled. "You wouldn't dare?" "Oh," Maggie said, "try me." They left that evening, but not far. 2 days later, Eric called to inform her that Franklin and Char had moved into the apartment across the hall from his own. "Temporarily," he said, "they need help getting back on their feet." Maggie didn't even respond, but the irony was thick. They had spent decades secretly leeching off her income, her labor, her trust. And now, when forced to survive without it, they crumbled. A month later, Maggie's attorney delivered the final blow in court. Not only had Franklin illegally withdrawn money from a personal account solely in her name, but Char had received over $1.3 million in direct and indirect transfers. The judge ruled in Maggie's favor without hesitation. The court ordered full repayment. Char would be forced to sell her home, the same one Maggie's money had helped purchase. When Franklin found out, he showed up on Maggie's porch unannounced. He looked older than she remembered, his once proud posture now bent, his face worn down with something between defeat and disbelief. "You really going to do this?" he asked. "Take everything?" She stepped outside, shutting the door behind her. "I'm not taking anything that isn't mine. I'm just retrieving what you thought I'd never notice." "She's all I have left," he muttered. "Char, Tyler, that's it. That's my family now." Maggie gave a soft, bitter laugh. "Then let them carry you. You spent 30 years choosing them over me. Now live with that choice." He looked at her then, not with anger, but fear. Because for the first time, he realized she wasn't bluffing. This wasn't a tantrum, this was the end. Back at Eric's apartment complex, things began to unravel quickly. Char was no longer the glowing angel Franklin had built her up to be. Living with her full-time meant seeing past the perfume and charm. Her temper was short. She resented being expected to cook or clean, and Tyler, her 28-year-old son, refused to find work or contribute anything. Tensions rose. Eric's wife Rachel called Maggie one evening, her voice shaking. Maggie, I can't take it anymore. Tyler's aggressive. Caleb's scared. Char took my jewelry and sold it last week." Maggie sighed, her voice steady. "You made your choices, Rachel. You all did. Now you get to live with them." That night, Maggie stood by her kitchen window, sipping peppermint tea, staring at the sky turning violet. She didn't feel triumphant. She felt free. Franklin, Char, Eric, they had built a house of lies, and now it was collapsing from within. And she was finally standing outside of it. For the first time in decades, Maggie Whitmore woke up to the sound of silence and liked it. No Franklin grumbling about the thermostat, no clinking of his spoon in the cereal bowl, no passive-aggressive sighs from across the table. Just the low hum of the ceiling fan and the early morning sun spilling across her hardwood floors. She brewed herself a strong cup of black coffee, exactly the way she liked it, without worrying if it was too bitter for Franklin's tastes. Then she pulled open the kitchen blinds and let the light flood in. This house was hers now, every window, every hallway, every creaky floorboard. It no longer echoed with the weight of obligation, it breathed with possibility. Later that week, she did something she hadn't done in years, something small but deeply symbolic. She bought herself a camera, a real one, not a phone, not something for practicality. A full-frame DSLR, the kind she used to dream about when she passed shop windows, but always told herself was too expensive. The clerk at the photography store showed her how to adjust the settings, how to change lenses, how to frame light. He offered her a pamphlet about local classes for beginners. "You'd fit right in," he smiled. "Lots of folks your age come in looking for a fresh start." She didn't say anything, just smiled and held the camera a little tighter. That night, Maggie walked down to Holston River Park, a quiet spot just 10 minutes from her house, and began snapping photos. Shadows on the water, a cluster of ducks floating past, a little girl running with her father. She didn't care if they were good. What mattered was how she felt, present, curious, and alive. Every morning afterward, she carried that camera like a journal. She'd take long walks, capturing storefronts bathed in golden light or trees rustling against a blue Tennessee sky. When she got home, she'd upload them to her computer and spend hours editing, smiling as colors popped and lines sharpened. Her life was no longer muted. It was vibrant again. She even joined a local photography group filled with retirees, artists, and wanderers like her. People who had once lost themselves in work or family or disappointment and had now reclaimed a piece of joy for themselves. They welcomed her without question. One day, a woman in the group named Della leaned over during a photo walk and whispered, "You've got a quiet strength, Maggie. That's rare." Maggie looked at her for a long moment and said simply, "It took me a long time to earn it." Outside of photography, something else came back to life. Her relationship with food. Not just eating to survive, not reheated leftovers or budget casseroles, but real food. Meals that required joy, patience, and color. She started experimenting with herbs again: thyme, basil, rosemary. She found an old recipe notebook buried in the back of a kitchen drawer, pages yellowed and dotted with flour stains. Inside were dishes she hadn't made in years: lemon rosemary chicken, wild mushroom risotto, cherry tart with almond crust. She tried them all, one by one, and every night she set the table for one, with real silverware, cloth napkins, and a wine glass, even if she was just serving herself, because she mattered, and she was worth the effort. Just when Maggie was beginning to settle into this new rhythm, the phone rang. It was Rachel, her former daughter-in-law, her voice trembling. "I can't take it anymore. Maggie, please. Can Caleb stay with you for a few days?" Maggie hesitated. She had drawn a hard line with Eric and the rest of them. But Caleb? He was innocent in all this. A sweet, wide-eyed boy who once clutched her hand during thunderstorms and begged for one more story before bed. "Bring him over," she said softly. "He's always welcome here." When Rachel dropped him off, Maggie noticed the dark circles under her eyes, the quiet way Caleb clung to her leg. Something was off. Before leaving, Rachel leaned in and whispered, "Tyler pushed him. He hit his head. He needed stitches." Maggie's stomach turned. Later that evening, she made Caleb a grilled cheese with tomato soup, his favorite. After dinner, he fell asleep on the couch with a blanket tucked under his chin and her old golden retriever curled at his feet. Maggie sat nearby, sipping her tea, watching the soft rise and fall of his chest. She felt an ache in her heart, but not pain. Resolve. She had spent so many years trying to hold a broken family together. Now, she understood. Some things weren't meant to be fixed, but some things, like this small boy with gentle eyes, were worth protecting. The next morning, Maggie took Caleb to the park and brought her camera along. As he ran through the grass, laughing, arms outstretched like an airplane, she lifted her lens and captured it. His joy, his movement, his freedom. She framed the photo and placed it on the mantel. The family portraits that once hung above the fireplace, posed smiles, stiff collars, forced proximity, were already packed in boxes. In their place were new memories, real ones, honest ones. A few days after Caleb came to stay, Eric called again, but this time, his voice was shaking. "Mom, it's Dad," he said. "He had a stroke." Maggie stood still, the words hitting her like the echo of a distant storm. Not because she was shocked, it almost felt inevitable, but because for a moment she realized her hands didn't tremble, her chest didn't tighten. "I don't know what to do," Eric continued, his voice cracking. "Char and Tyler, they cleaned out the apartment, took everything. Jewelry, electronics, gone. We filed a police report. The doctors say he may never walk again." There was a pause. "Can you come?" She considered it for several seconds, then said softly but clearly, "I'll come." But only once. At the hospital, Franklin looked like a husk of the man she once knew, pale, fragile, tethered to machines. His hair had turned completely white, and his eyes, once sharp and calculating, were now dim with something that resembled regret. When he saw her, a tear rolled down his cheek. His lips trembled as he reached for her hand. "I'm sorry," he whispered, but Maggie didn't take his hand. She stood over him, composed, her voice level. "There's nothing to be sorry for, Franklin. We're strangers now." He blinked. That single sentence broke something in him. She saw it, but she didn't soften, because she had already softened for decades, and no one had noticed. Eric followed her out of the room, desperation in every step. "He can't care for himself. Rachel's done. I can't do this alone. Please, he needs you." Maggie turned to her son, her only child, and looked at him long and hard. "You told me once not to expect anything from you," she said. "Now I'm asking you to do the same." "But I'm your son. And I was your mother when you needed me most. I stayed, I cooked, I cried in silence and smiled through betrayals you helped excuse. I gave you everything, and when I finally needed someone to stand by me, you weren't there." Eric opened his mouth, but no sound came. She gave him a final nod. "This is your life now, and this time I'm not coming back to fix it." Then she walked away. Weeks passed. Maggie didn't visit the hospital again. She didn't ask about Shar or Tyler. She didn't need to. She already knew how that story would end. Eventually, word came down. Char and Tyler were arrested. The heart condition that Franklin had paid for all those years? It never existed. The police uncovered a trail of false documents, fabricated prescriptions, and fraudulent claims, designed to drain him, dollar by dollar, until there was nothing left to give. Justice, cold and clear, had finally arrived. And what about Maggie? She kept living. She traveled with her photography group to Vermont that fall, capturing orange and gold leaves falling across winding country roads. She took Caleb along on a weekend trip to Lake George, where he learned to paddle a canoe, and she snapped a picture of his proud grin with the sun behind him. She started a small Etsy shop selling framed prints, landscapes, portraits, everyday beauty. The income didn't matter. What mattered was the joy of creating something that was hers alone. She brewed tea in the mornings and read novels in the afternoon. She hosted small dinners for friends who had weathered their own storms, divorcees, widows, women who had given too much and finally learned to give back to themselves. The old family photos stayed in a box in the attic. In their place were new memories, real smiles, genuine warmth, moments unscripted and unforced. One evening, after dropping Caleb off with Rachel, Maggie sat on her porch, wrapped in a knit shawl, sipping peppermint tea. A breeze drifted across the yard. Her dog, Rosie, lay curled beside her feet. She felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Not adrenaline, not triumph, not grief. Peace. Not the kind that comes from resolution with others, but the kind that comes from reconciliation with yourself. She thought about the woman she used to be, the quiet wife, the background mother, the dependable fixture in everyone else's story. Then she thought about who she had become. A woman who set boundaries, a woman who walked away from betrayal, a woman who stood her ground, even when no one stood with her, and above all, a woman who finally understood that her life didn't belong to anyone else. There would be no dramatic final showdown, no deathbed reconciliation, no picture-perfect ending where everyone came back together. That was the fantasy they had tried to sell her, but this was reality. And it was beautiful, not because it was easy, but because it was hers. The past would always live somewhere, in ledgers, in memory, in the corners of rooms once filled with silence. But the future was open, bright, waiting. And this time the story belonged to her. The story of Maggie Whitmore serves as a powerful reminder that the deepest wounds often come not from enemies, but from those we love and trust the most. After decades of sacrifice, working tirelessly, living frugally, and keeping the peace for the sake of her family, Maggie discovered that her loyalty had been met with betrayal. Her husband had built a second life behind her back. Her own son, someone she had poured her heart into raising, stood quietly on the sidelines. But what makes Maggie's story remarkable isn't the betrayal. It's the way she refused to let it define her. Instead of crumbling, she stood up. She demanded justice, and more importantly, she reclaimed herself. The greatest lesson here is this: you can give a lot in this life. Your love, your forgiveness, your time, even your money, but never give so much that you lose yourself in the process. Maggie teaches us that kindness should never come at the cost of self-respect, that setting boundaries isn't cruelty, it's clarity, and that sometimes the people who once leaned on you the hardest will turn away when you need them most. No matter your age, it's never too late to start over, to live a life that's truly yours, not one built on silence, sacrifice, or someone else's expectations. To stop being the caretaker of others' comfort and start being the author of your own peace. Most importantly, staying silent too long will turn you into a shadow in your own story. Speak up, walk away, live on your terms. Because in the end, Maggie didn't just survive betrayal, she transformed it. She didn't ask for permission. She simply chose herself. And sometimes that's the bravest thing a person can do.